Welcome back to Bad Things in History, where every year was a bad year. Our exploration of the 1980s is nearing the end of the decade, but we aren't running out of terrible stories to share. The last few years of the 1980s were a menagerie of senseless death and destruction. This time we look at 1987. For some reason, there were a lot of shootings that year. For our first story, let's start with a civil rights protest. Forsyth County protests. Forsyth County is located in North Georgia, about 30 miles away from the state capital of Atlanta. The county has a long history of being unfriendly to black people. In 1912, a black man was lynched. Supposedly, he flirted with a white woman. In addition to killing the man, residents waged war on black people who lived in the county. By the end of the year, only white people lived there. Forsyth County became what was known as a sundown county, which meant that black people found within its borders at night could be arrested, beaten, or possibly killed. It was so bad that in 1976, when an African-American man rented a ramp for his boat at a marina in the county, he encountered burning crosses. Even minority truck drivers who entered the county had to be escorted by state police to prevent violence. The civil rights activist Hosea Williams was invited to join a march in Forsyth County on January 17, 1987. The purpose of the march was to bring attention to the racial issues in the county. In the weeks leading up to the march, white supremacists did everything they could to discourage it. They also developed plans to interfere with the event. When the day arrived, 75 demonstrators, both white and black, rode in buses to Forsyth County. They were running a little late. As they stepped off the buses, they were faced with 400 white protesters. Most of them were members of the Ku Klux Klan. As the civil rights supporters began marching, they were attacked. They were hit by bricks and other objects. The police were badly outnumbered and couldn't stop the violence. The March for Civil Rights had to be canceled. On January 24th, they decided to try again. This time, more people came, including U.S. Representative John Lewis, Atlanta Mayor Andrew Young, and presidential candidate Gary Hart. There were 1,000 white supremacists waiting for them. Among them was David Duke, a politician who was also a member and leader of the Ku Klux Klan. However, there were also 3,000 police officers and 2,000 members of the National Guard helping to protect the Civil Rights March. A few people were injured, but this time the march was allowed to succeed. On February 9th, Oprah Winfrey broadcast an episode of her talk show from Forsyth County. Many of the residents expressed their desire to keep the area entirely white. Today, Forsyth County has 5 times the population it did in the 1980s. A small percentage of those are black. Lieyu Massacre. The islands of Taiwan have been contested since 1945 when they split from China. Because of this, the Taiwanese government ensures that their islands are very well defended, and sometimes intruders are killed. In 1987, the Kinmen Archipelago islands were still considered a war zone. They were under martial law, and the military was serious about enforcement. Any unauthorized visitors to those islands were killed. In 1982, the government told the military to return any refugees that accidentally landed on the island. In practice, they did the exact opposite. In January 1985, 8 Chinese fishermen came ashore after their engine failed. The soldiers were ordered to kill them. 2 of the fishermen escaped and ran into caves, but when they were found, the men were thrown off a cliff. On March 6, 1987, a boat of Vietnamese refugees came ashore. They wanted to request political asylum. Instead, their boat was hit with anti-tank rounds from 2 directions. 3 unarmed Vietnamese men exited the boat and were immediately shot. Soldiers then approached the boat and threw grenades inside. As they entered, they discovered several injured civilians. The men, women, and children were brought out onto the beach. The soldiers called headquarters. They were told to leave no witnesses. All of the refugees were killed. Hong Kong was aware of the refugees as they were recently denied entry there. A newspaper from that city reported on the missing boat. Eventually, a newspaper in Taiwan broke the story about the massacre. The Taiwanese government tried to cover it up, but failed. Eventually, as a result of international political pressure, martial law was repealed in 1988. Trials were held, and some of the military leaders were found guilty. But when public attention shifted, they were returned to duty. Hungerford Massacre. The UK also experienced extreme violence. Michael Ryan was born on May 18, 1960, in Marlborough. He dropped out of college as a young man and began working as a handyman, but Michael couldn't stay employed for long. In 1986, he started receiving unemployment benefits from the government. Additionally, he was licensed to own several firearms. He owned 2 pistols, a shotgun, and a Type 56 semi-automatic rifle. There was no reason for anyone to believe that he would use them to kill people, but that's exactly what he did. Early on August 19, 1987, Michael put his guns in his car and drove to Savernake Forest. He found a woman and her 2 children picnicking in the forest. He shot the woman 14 times, but didn't hurt the children. He then left the forest and stopped at a gas station. While there, he tried to kill the cashier. However, the gun jammed, so he left the store, went back onto the highway, and returned home. At 12:45 p.m., Michael walked into the house he shared with his mother. He shot and killed his mother and the 2 family dogs. As Michael climbed back into his car and tried to leave, it wouldn't start, so he walked back into the house and set it on fire. Then he grabbed his guns and began walking to the nearest school. He shot and killed 2 of his neighbors. A teenage girl was also shot 4 times in the legs, though she survived. He shot 1 more woman in the back, but the injury wasn't fatal. As Michael entered the footpath that connected his neighborhood to the school, he saw a man walking his dog. He killed him with a single shot. Meanwhile, police were trying to close off the roads to stop more people from crossing Michael's path. The police were also unarmed, so Michael shot at one of them, hitting him in the chest and killing him. He spent the next several minutes shooting at civilians who tried to drive down the road. A woman and her daughter were injured. Then he killed 2 more people who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. As Michael kept moving and neared the center of the town, he saw another man walking a dog. He shot and killed that person as well. Next, he killed a taxi driver. He injured 2 more people and killed another before forcing his way into a house. He killed the elderly couple living there, then shot at the houses around the neighborhood. Then he left the house and kept walking down the road. As Michael moved, he was able to kill 1 more person who drove by. Around 2 p.m., he entered John O'Gaunt School, which was thankfully closed for the summer. He shot at police helicopters and any cars he saw, but the authorities finally had Michael contained to a single location. A police sergeant was able to call and speak to him. During the exchange, Michael said, "It's funny. I killed all those people, but I haven't the guts to blow my own brains out." Police forced their way into the room he occupied a little after 9 p.m. that evening. Michael was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The shooting spree killed 17 people and injured at least 15 more. Nobody ever figured out why Michael decided to go on a murderous rampage. Korean Air Flight 858. Air travel was sometimes a dangerous affair in the 1980s. Korean Air Flight 858 was a Boeing 707 that normally flew from Baghdad, Iraq, to Seoul, South Korea. It also became a target for North Korean terrorists. Kim Yong-hui was born in the city of Kaesong on January 27, 1962. She was originally trained as an actress. Then she went to school and studied Japanese. Before she graduated, Kim was recruited as a spy. After 7 years of training, she was ready for her mission. Kim was sent to Europe to travel with a man who is also a North Korean agent. They flew to Moscow, then Budapest, and finally Baghdad. On November 29th, the pair had a Panasonic transistor radio that had been turned into a time bomb. They bought tickets for Flight 858. Kim and her partner boarded the plane and then placed the bomb above their seats. After making sure it was set properly, the duo then got off the aircraft without anyone noticing. Around 11:30 p.m., Flight 858 took off from what was then Saddam International Airport. 9 hours later, as the aircraft neared Thailand, the bomb exploded. The Boeing 707 crashed into the Andaman Sea, killing all 115 people aboard. Most of the victims were construction workers trying to return home after years of working in the Middle East. Meanwhile, Kim and her partner in crime tried to escape. When their flight arrived in Bahrain, local officials realized the passports were fake. Realizing they were about to be caught, the pair pulled out cigarettes laced with cyanide and tried to commit suicide. Kim was stopped from ending her life, but the man who helped her succeeded in poisoning himself. On December 15, 1987, Kim was sent to Seoul, South Korea. At first, she claimed to be Chinese and denied knowing anything. However, South Korean agents pointed out that she possessed cigarettes which could only be found in North Korea. Kim finally decided to tell the truth. In January 1988, she admitted at a press conference that she was responsible for the bombing. Kim said, "It is natural that I should be punished and killed 100 times for my sin." She was convicted and sentenced to death for the attack. However, President Roh Tae-woo pardoned her, saying, "The persons who ought to be on trial here are the leaders of North Korea. This child is as much a victim of this evil regime as the passengers aboard KAL 858. Kim is still alive but is kept in an undisclosed location to protect her from North Koreans who might want to kill her. As a result of this attack, the United States began including North Korea on its state sponsors of terrorism list. Queen Street Massacre. Australia also made its own worthy entry to the year's most violent events. Frank Vitkovic was born on September 7, 1965 in Melbourne. His father was from Croatia and his mother was from Italy. As a teenager, Frank was a talented tennis player, but he suffered a knee injury and had to stop playing. He underwent surgery to fix the problem, but it didn't work. Frank had to quit playing tennis. In 1984, he went to law school, hoping to build a respectable and profitable career, but he found school very difficult. In 1987, he finally gave up and dropped out of school. On December 8, 1987, at about 4:20 p.m., Frank walked out of the elevator and onto the 5th floor of the Telecom Employees Credit Cooperative building. He was there to see a former friend named Con Margelis. Margelis came to the counter and began talking to Frank. Frank produced a paper bag and then removed an M1 carbine from it. He pointed the gun at his former friend and pulled the trigger, but the gun jammed. Margelis ducked behind the counter, then ran and hid in the women's bathroom. Meanwhile, Frank began shooting. He killed a young woman in the office who was trying to run away. Next, he took an elevator to the 12th floor. He shot 3 people dead before descending to the 11th floor. As he reached the computer training center, Frank shot and killed several more people. Finally, Frank Carmody, after being shot several times, wrestled the gun away from Frank Vitkovic. Frank Vitkovic ran and tried to jump out the window. Someone grabbed his feet and kept him from falling, but Frank kept kicking until he was finally released. He fell to his death on the street below. Before his crime spree ended, Frank killed 9 people and injured 5 more. When police searched his home, they discovered that he had been planning on killing people for a long time, and he had also purchased his rifle legally. He left a note that said, "Today is going to be the day. The anger in my head has got too much for me. I've got to get rid of my violent impulses. The time has come to die. There is no other way out." The subsequent investigation also found that Frank had recently taken a personality test for the Church of Scientology. The results would have been enough to consider him insane by most medical standards, but the church, rather than refer him to a psychiatrist, suggested he enroll in a Scientology course. Were you alive in 1987? If so, do you remember any of these events? Or were you too busy soaking up popular culture to notice the death and misery playing out all around you? Don't worry, you're not a bad person. Well, yes, you are, but we're all pretty horrible, so it's not really your fault. Don't forget to subscribe so we can keep lifting your mood every week. Like this video if you want to see more 1980s mayhem. Thank you for watching Bad Things in History.